Hey, this is Josh. Today's lesson is on prime factorization. I got my 4 numbers here that I'm going to be factoring, and so let's just jump right in. Actually, before we do that, let's just talk about what prime numbers are and what composite numbers are. Prime numbers, just to make sure you're on the same page as I am, are numbers that you can only divide by 1 and themselves. Okay, so a number like 7. You can't break 7 into 2 smaller numbers that you can multiply to make a 7. Now, yes, you could do like 3.5 times 2, but you're not using whole numbers or integers, and that's really the key. Okay, so any prime number is just a number that can only be divided by itself and by the number 1. That's a prime number. The other numbers are called composite numbers, and those are numbers that you can divide by like 2, 4, 7, 18, who knows what the number is, but the bottom line is you can divide it multiple times, or I should say by different numbers other than just that number and the number 1, because anything can be divided by the number 1. So let's jump into these guys here. What we're trying to do is create those factor trees where we can get down to just the prime values. Now, it's a skill that you might say, why do I even need to know this? But it does come in handy later on in your math career. So it's something worth practicing now and then kind of just waiting until it shows up again. You say, oh, now I'm starting to see why I need to know these prime factors. Let's start with a number like 12. And I'm going to write it as big as I can just so that we have plenty of space here and you can see everything. We're working for primes, right? Now 2 is the only prime number that's actually an even number as well. And I always like to use 2s just to kind of like break this thing into smaller pieces. And that is your goal. And so what 2 numbers make 12? Well, 2 times 6. Now the reason I use 2 is because now I already have one of my numbers as a prime. So that one is just done. I can't break 2 into anything smaller. And so now I have my 6. What can I do with a 6? 2 times 3. And so at that point, can I go any farther down? No. So the prime factors of 12 would be 2 and 2 and 3. And because they're factors, that means that you can, in order to get back up to this top number here, you can just multiply all these guys together. And it should work out. 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 3 is 12. And so there is kind of a little way that you can check your work. All right. So again, prime numbers. And I always try to divide numbers. If it's an even number, I always try to divide it by 2s and then go up to 3s and then 5s and then 7s. I kind of like start with the lowest number first, just because it usually works out pretty well. Now, I will say, as these get bigger, depending on your class, I'm hoping you're able to use a calculator, because otherwise you're just going to be sitting there forever. I mean, they could give you a number like 2,426, and then you're just like cranking out, division work, where if you had a calculator, you can usually get through it pretty quick. The number 20, 2 times, exactly, 2 times 10. Okay, and this is where your math facts really start to come into play. So 10 is 2 times 5, and at that point I'm done, right? 5 is prime. So I have a 2 and a 2 and a 5, and I'm done. Those would be my prime factors of 20. If you want to pause the video, try these 2 on your own, I say go for it. Because if you're getting the hang of it, it's much better that you start doing some of these by yourself. 72. Okay, well now the numbers are a little bit bigger, and let's say you don't know what 72 can be created from. Again, it's an even number, so you could divide it by 2. That's when you get this handy dandy little machine here and just do 72 divided by 2 is 36. And then from there, 36 divided by 2 is 18. And 18 is 2 times 9, and 9 is 3 times 3. So if I went a little too fast, that's why you have a calculator. That's all I'm doing right now. And this is why, again, why I like writing them out like this, because I think it's a nice way to just have all your factors in a nice factor tree. If you want to put boxes around them or circles around them, you can. I'm just going to put little lines just to kind of remind me what came from what. And so if you wanted to write this out as what are the prime factors, some books will say they want you to write it out as 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. Some books will say, I want you to write it as, they want you to group this stuff together. So 2 times 2 times 2 is the same thing as 2 to the third, right? You're going to use an exponent saying that there's how many 2's? There's 3 of them being multiplied together, times 3 times 3, or 3 squared. So like I said, some books will be okay with you, or teachers will be okay with you doing it like this. And then some will say, well, you should condense it just because that's a little bit easier to work with. Now, when it comes to working on, here, let me erase this guy, greatest common factors, sometimes this stuff is very handy to do. Same thing with least common multiples. So it isn't like I'm doing this just for my health. Sometimes you actually do need to do that as you're working through these. So let me do this last one here, 135. Now it ends in a 5. So if it ends in a 5, I usually try to divide it by 5 first and then see what we get. So 135 divided by 5 is 27. If I didn't know what 27 could be divided by, I don't know, try it. I mean, I know it's 9 times 3, but let's try it on a calculator. Let's see. Let's say I didn't know. Let's say I divided by, it won't be divided by 2 because it's not a 2, 4, 6, or 8, or a 0. So let's divide it by 3 because that would be the next largest prime number you could use. And lo and behold, if I divide it by 3, I get a 9 over here. And I know that 9 can be divided like that, 3 times 3. So my factors are 5 times 3 times 3 times 3, or now I guess let me put them in the right order because there are books that will say, well, put the smallest numbers first and move up in ascending order. So let me move this guy to the front and just say, instead of doing 3 times 3 times 3, I could do 3 to the third, right? Because there's 3 3's, times 5, and leave it at that. Okay? So I guess worst case, you could write it as 3 times 3 times 3 times 5, just to show that you've listed all your factors, even though you've done it there. But if you wanted to condense it, that would be how you do it. And so I hope this is a good review of prime factorization, the basics of breaking these problems down. Okay? If you want to follow along, I have another video that I'm working on here, which will be coming right out, which is the least common multiple, where we actually need some of this stuff. Okay? So thanks for watching. Check out my other videos, and I'll be seeing you around. Thanks.